Okay, let's do some dynamic content through JavaScript onto our HTML page. Normally, our data would be coming in maybe from a database or from maybe a server API area, but we're going to be bringing in data into our HTML through an array, object array. And so it's a little different from maybe real life, but the way we set it up will be the same whether it's come from a database or another API or something like that. We're just creating our own object array instead. All right, so let's go ahead and go back to our movies HTML and CSS that we created previously. And we had put in 2 movies in article elements that were static, meaning they're not coming in dynamically. We just kind of hard coded in each of those values. And if we had 10 movies, we would have had to hard code 10 article elements in here. But we're going to make this really dynamic so that when anything changes in any of the movies or any movies get added or taken out, it's going to automatically come in dynamically and update our page according to the updated information coming in. This will be a really good real life example for us to go through. All right, so first of all, we're going to take out the static information. And I'm going to go ahead and just delete one of them completely, one of the movies that we had. And then I'm going to take this whole article and I'm just going to cut it with a Command or Control X so that we can create it as a template literal in our JavaScript file. So I'll go ahead and create that JavaScript file and I'll give it the same name, movies.js. And I'll go ahead and paste that in. Now that's definitely going to be in a template literal. So we want to go ahead and store that as such. So I'm just going to call it HTML and then put those back ticks, which remember is under the escape key on either end of that. So now we've got kind of this big string, this template literal that's going to be stored in a variable called HTML. Okay, so it's not coming into our HTML yet, but I'll go ahead and save that. And I also want to hook up that new JavaScript file and I'm going to defer it. Okay, so that now it can see that JavaScript. And so we can kind of test it out. It won't be the final product, but we can kind of test it out by targeting this. Now that we have this empty section with no articles in it at all, it has the ID of movie-list. We could set that up and we could say the movie list is going to be, and then grab that from the DOM, the query selector. And it was movie, an ID of movie-list. And then we could come in here and just say, hey, grab this movie. And in that movie list, that empty section that we have, go ahead and put its inner HTML to be equal to this whole template literal. Okay, and then if we look at that page, we can see that one movie coming in. Okay, it is coming in kind of dynamically, but it's still pretty static in JavaScript just because it's just the one title, the one, image, the one date. So it didn't do a whole lot to change what we really had before. So now we're going to go ahead and start using that array method, the .forEach array method, to go through each movie and put it onto the screen. So if you look at your ponder here, we want it to come in and have these 4 different movies coming in, and they are stored in this object array. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that. We already have this. It is already here, so I'm not going to worry about that. We'd already had it from last week. But this is in the JavaScript area. We're going to go ahead and copy that, and I'll go ahead and put it above this information. And we can see each of our movies has different information in each of these objects. Okay, it did have a little starter of a for each for us. and it wants to go ahead and put the code to create each movie in here. So we can go ahead and just move this entire thing inside our object array. So what's happening here is it's saying movies for each. And if we look at our object array, we can see that it's called movies. So it's saying, hey, take this array, and for each item in the array or each of these objects in the array, do this to it. And instead of the word item, we're using movie. So just without an S. And we are using an arrow function. So a little bit different syntax here, but it's going to go through and it's going to do each movie. Now, to make this fit each movie, we need to do what are called expressions in our template literal, or expression interpolations is sometimes what they're called. So we're going to go ahead, and everywhere it's going to be different for each movie. For example, this is the title. We can see that we have a movies.title. So we're going to say the name of the array dot the property, and it's going to be placed in here kind of like a variable. And remember, we need to use a $sign and curly braces for each one of those. They're coming in as movie. That's why we use movie without an S, dot title. And so we can always look here and see exactly how that's spelled. And we'll go ahead and put title there. Again, we're going to have to do the same thing for each image. And we can see that the image SRC already has quote marks. So we can go ahead and get rid of all of this with the quote marks and put $sign movie dot image SRC. And I'm getting that from right here, just exactly how it's spelled there. And the alternative text is the same way. Each object comes in, bring in the image alt that goes with that. Same with the date. And again, just to check that that's the right spelling. And we also have an age. And we also have a genre. And then this one's interesting because we want to get the length of how many stars it has. So right here where we have the ARIA, the accessibility, this 5 will be different for each one. And so we're actually going to do movie dot stars, which is what it's called right here, stars, but we're going to get the length of that. Okay, so it's going to see how many are in there, and so it'll give us a 4 instead of just the movies, or just the stars. All right, and then right here, the stars will be different for each one. So we'll go ahead and change this. And then the description will, of course, be different for each one. Okay, and then just make sure I spelled that right. Description, yep, okay. All right, so now it should come through and show movies. If we look at that, we get the last movie. And that's happening because each time we're going through each movie, it's going to go through Spider-Man, and then it's going to go through the next one. And we're totally replacing each time that one's the HTML each time. So we would have to put something like a plus equal to, saying add to what was already there instead of just replacing the whole section with a new article and then replacing each time. So then that will bring in all of them. Okay, so we're getting some dynamic data now, which is really cool. So for each of these objects, it's going to go through and it's going to make sure it gets all the information for each one of those, and it will be different for each. Oh, I'm getting an undefined here though, which tells me I messed up on age. And it's called ages with an S, not just age. Should have seen the dots there. Maybe you saw that. Okay, that looks better. All right, so one thing that's maybe not as efficient as it could be here is because when we use a plus equal sign, it's having to update the DOM every time it loops through. So we need to be a little more efficient so that the browser doesn't have to reparse and rebuild the entire container at every iteration. So this, I mean, you could leave it this way. It might just take a little longer to load, but there is a little bit more efficient way I want to show you. So what we're going to do with this next one is just change it a little bit here. I'm going to take out targeting this every single time. I don't think I'm going to put that outside of the loop. And I'm going to go ahead and create this article instead of bringing it in as part of the template literal. So I'm going to go ahead and just take out the opening and closing article tag. And this time I'm going to create it using JavaScript. So I'm going to have a constant called article, and I'm going to go ahead and create that article tag with a create element method. And it needs to have a parameter of what am I creating? I'm creating an article tag. And since it did have a class, if you notice that, I'm going to go ahead and add that class back in since that was part of the template literal before with the class equal, and put it here. It did have a class of movie. If you don't remember what that was, it was coming in and it was, centering it and all this different stuff here. So that's what we're doing here. Making sure it's got that class for CSS. Okay, and now we're going to go ahead and append this HTML into this article. So a little bit different down here. So now we're going to say article inner HTML is going to be assigned the HTML, take off the plus, and then we're going to append it onto the empty section with the ID of movie list. And just so it's not putting a lot of that reparsing and rebuilding of the DOM every loop, this is going to help it be a little more efficient. And we'll see it should work the same way. And so instead of having that article inside of our template literal, we went ahead and created it, gave it a class, and then appended instead of doing that plus equal to, which was a little less efficient. But the same idea. All right, so there we have some dynamic data coming in. And remember, in real life, this might be coming from a database or somebody else's server with you using an API and fetching some data and converting that to a JavaScript object. But this, it gives you the whole kind of outline of how that's going to work, and using these expressions inside our template literal, these interpolations to go ahead and do that. This is very similar to what you'll be doing with the book blog for your assignment this week.